In the midst of Hurricane Milton ravaging Bradenton, a reclusive black mechanic drives his old pickup truck to help evacuate a neighbor's family to the hospital. There he discovers the ICU is minutes away from losing power, with 3 critical patients inside. Without hesitation, he bravely drives back through the storm to retrieve his only generator, delivering it just in time, then quietly slips away. What he doesn't know is that his courageous act is about to change his life forever. It was the kind of sky that made people lock their doors and check the news twice. Dark, swollen clouds loomed over Bradenton, Florida, thick with the promise of chaos. Hurricane Milton wasn't just another storm. It was the kind that had its own name whispered days before it hit, the kind that turned front yards into rivers and hospitals into shelters. The neighborhood near 14th Street West was already starting to flood. People hurried past each other, their eyes anxious, cars packed tight with belongings. In the middle of the rush, one house stood still. No boarded windows, no packed bags. Just a small, weather-worn garage with a tin sign barely clinging to the wall, Reed Auto Repairs. Inside, Malcolm Reed wiped grease off his hands and looked out through the rain-flecked glass. He was 40, tall and broad-shouldered, with skin the color of dark coffee and deep-set eyes that looked older than his years. His face wore a quiet seriousness framed by a short beard peppered with early gray. Dressed in a faded mechanic's jumpsuit, Malcolm moved like a man used to fixing things no one else wanted to touch. Cars, machines, even people's trust. He lived alone. No family pictures on the walls, just a radio on the counter playing warnings on repeat. Most folks in this neighborhood barely knew his name. Some crossed the street when they saw him. More than once, customers had taken one look at his skin and decided their engine troubles could wait for a real shop across town. Even now, as neighbors packed up to flee the storm, few glanced at him, and no one knocked on his door to ask if he needed help. He was the black mechanic down the block, handy in a pinch, invisible the rest of the time. But Malcolm didn't care much for attention. He cared about engines that purred instead of coughed. He cared about the generator he kept in the corner of his shop, old, loud, but reliable. That generator had kept his fridge running through more than one hurricane. It was his peace of mind in a town that never offered much else. As the wind began to howl louder through the trees, a sudden knock rattled the shop door. He opened it to find Rachel, a neighbor from 2 houses down, soaked and frantic. Her 2 kids stood behind her, clutching backpacks. She didn't own a car, and the emergency shelters had already closed their lists. The nearest hospital with storm-safe clearance was across town in Sarasota, but she had no way to get there. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys, told her to bundle the kids into his truck, and locked up his garage behind him. Outside, sirens wailed, tree branches cracked, and the first real bands of Hurricane Milton began to pelt the town. Inside the truck, the kids were silent, their eyes wide. Rachel whispered a thank you, voice trembling. Malcolm said nothing. He just looked in the rearview mirror, adjusted the strap of his old baseball cap, and pressed the gas. The real storm hadn't hit yet, but something deep inside him already knew. This night would be about more than just surviving. The rain was relentless now, not the scattered drops from earlier, but heavy, blinding sheets that slammed sideways against Malcolm's windshield. Wipers thrashed back and forth in vain. His old Ford pickup groaned as it rolled through the rising water along Manatee Avenue, tires half submerged. Malcolm gripped the wheel tighter, leaning forward, trying to make out the road ahead, but the world was slowly turning into a blur of gray. Streetlights flickered, then cut out completely. The sky rumbled low, like something was crawling just above the clouds, waiting to come down hard. Inside the cab, Rachel was trying not to cry. Her youngest, Caleb, maybe 5 or 6, clutched a stuffed animal against his chest. Beside him, his sister Imani, older, sharper, kept her eyes locked on the side mirror, watching the world disappear behind them. The air was heavy with unspoken fear, not just of the storm, but of everything it represented. Being poor, being overlooked, being without options when the world starts to break apart. "Thank you," Rachel whispered again, barely audible. "Nobody else would even answer the door." Malcolm nodded, eyes still forward. He didn't need thanks. He needed the truck to hold. The hospital was at least 30 minutes away in normal conditions. Now, with wind gusts over 70 miles an hour and traffic lights out, it felt like driving through a nightmare with no landmarks. He took side roads when he could, avoiding downed trees, broken glass, loose street signs spinning like blades. Every few minutes, he'd glance in the rearview mirror, not at the kids, but at the tarped bed of the truck, making sure the bungee cords holding his tools hadn't snapped. Deep beneath the tarp, like a hidden ace, was the generator. He hadn't planned to bring it, habit maybe, or instinct. Either way it was there, humming softly like a promise. They reached a narrow bridge outside of Cortez that led to the highway. As soon as they began to cross, a wall of wind hit them head-on, pushing the truck sideways. Rachel gasped, clutching the dashboard. The kids screamed. Malcolm kept his foot steady on the pedal, eyes locked on the fading white line in front of him. For a second he saw something, a memory maybe, his wife's face, calm and still in that hospital bed years ago. No power, no machines, no help in time. They had called it an unfortunate delay. That phrase had carved itself into his chest and never left. When they reached the other side, the cab fell into a silence thick as the storm. Rachel looked over at him, eyes wide, with unspoken questions. "You okay?" she asked, trying to read his face. "I'm good," Malcolm replied quietly, then added, "We're going to get there." Up ahead, Sarasota Memorial Hospital rose out of the haze like a fortress, its emergency lights glowing faintly behind sheets of rain. Ambulances clogged the entrance. Volunteers in neon ponchos waved down cars, directing evacuees into makeshift waiting zones. Malcolm pulled to the curb and helped Rachel unbuckle the kids. He walked them all the way to the entrance, shoulders hunched against the wind. A dozen security guards stopped him at the doors. "Just them?" the man asked, not even making eye contact. Malcolm nodded. The guard gestured quickly and ushered Rachel and her children inside. She looked back once, mouthed "thank you" again. Then she was gone. Malcolm stood there a moment, unsure whether to wait or drive home. The wind had picked up again, sharp and urgent. A nurse passed by, speaking into a radio, voice tight. "We've got maybe 30 minutes on backup power. ICU is priority, but that gen's acting up. Someone check the coolant line." That stopped him cold. 30 minutes? He turned slowly toward the hospital wall, listening harder. Another staff member passed, muttering something about patient stabilization, respiratory systems at risk, 3 critical patients upstairs. His gaze drifted toward the truck. That generator in his bed wasn't new. It was patched together from scrap, from machines others tossed away. But it worked. It always worked. And if the hospital's backup was failing... Malcolm stepped back toward the curb. He caught the eye of the security guard again. "Y'all got power issues?" he asked. The man looked him over, hesitant. "Nothing you need to worry about." There it was again, that wall, not just of class, but of race, that assumption, buried just beneath the surface. He wouldn't understand. He couldn't help. "I got a generator in my truck," Malcolm said flatly. "Strong enough to cover a wing, maybe more. Quiet, efficient. I built it myself." That made the man blink, finally looking at him fully. "Wait here," he said, then disappeared into the lobby. Minutes passed like molasses. The rain didn't stop. Malcolm thought about driving home, but then the nurse returned, breathless, eyes darting between him and the truck. "You said you have a generator?" she asked. "Is it gas? Does it run clean?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Fueled, covered, strapped down and ready." She hesitated, then radioed someone. "How far is your place?" she asked. 5, maybe 6 miles, he said, her face twisted, conflicted. "It's too far," she muttered. "Not in this storm." But Malcolm was already moving toward the truck. "You'll never make it in time," the guard called after him. Malcolm climbed into the cab, wiped the condensation from the inside of the windshield, and stared out into the storm-wrecked road ahead. He didn't know if he'd make it. He only knew that if he didn't try, 3 people upstairs might not see morning. He adjusted his cap, started the engine, and drove back into the wind. The wheels splashed into the flooded street as Malcolm pushed the old truck harder than he ever had. Wind clawed at the sides like hands trying to tear the truck off the road, and every gust made the steering wheel tremble in his grip. He leaned forward, squinting through the wash of rain that struck the windshield like bullets. Wipers whipped back and forth without rhythm. The world had turned to fog and water and noise, but Malcolm didn't let up. He didn't have the time. Somewhere behind him, in a hospital gasping for power, 3 people were hanging by threads, and maybe, just maybe, he held the knot. Inside the cab, the heater had given up against the cold dampness in his clothes. He felt the chill creep into his chest and spread through his bones. But it wasn't just the weather, it was memory. It was the weight of everything this storm reminded him of. He didn't want to think about it, but the moment clung to him. 7 years ago, another storm, another night of panic. That time it had been his wife, Leah. She'd had asthma all her life, but that night it had gotten worse fast. The roads had flooded just as they were leaving. By the time they got to the hospital, the power had failed. The machines were down. The backup generator didn't come online for another 10 minutes. 10 minutes too long. He'd held her hand in the dark as she slipped away, watching nurses scramble helplessly with manual pumps and flashlights. He remembered the silence after her last breath more than the chaos before it. Cold, heavy silence. The kind that never really goes away. They had called it an unfortunate delay. A phrase he never forgave. He never blamed the staff. He blamed the system. The one that let equipment rot until people died. The one that forgot neighborhoods like his. The one that had buried Leah and then sent him a bill. Now here he was again. A hospital on the brink, a machine that might make the difference. Only this time, he wasn't going to let silence win. The roads back to his garage were worse than when he left. Water rose high up the tires, swirling like oily rivers. He swerved to avoid debris, metal signs, pieces of roofing, even a shattered canoe. He knew every crack in these streets, every hidden dip beneath the water, but that didn't make them safer. At one point, a fallen tree blocked the lane. With no way around, he slammed the truck into park and climbed out. Rain slapped his face as he wrapped his arms around the soaked branches, dragging and hauling them piece by piece, boots sinking into the mud with every step. His muscles screamed, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Each second that ticked by was a second closer to losing someone else. When he reached the garage, the place looked barely alive. The tin roof flapped violently. A side shutter had blown off and now dangled by one hinge. He burst through the side door, the wind howling behind him. Everything inside shook, but the generator sat untouched in the corner. Wrapped, ready. It was old, pieced together from parts he'd pulled out of junkyards and trade-ins. He'd built it with his hands and grief, back in the months after Leah passed. Some men drank their pain. Malcolm welded his. With practiced movements, he pulled back the tarp and checked the fuel line. Tank full. Oil clean. He gave the cord one pull. The engine roared to life with a satisfying growl. He shut it off again quickly, wrapped it tight in a tarp, then bound it with rope like a gift he couldn't afford to lose. Every knot was a silent promise to her memory. He pushed the heavy frame onto a dolly, wrestling it toward the truck's tailgate. The wind nearly knocked it sideways. One bad slip and he'd be pinned, or worse. But he braced, lifted, and muscled it into place. Once secure, he tied it down with everything he had, cords, rope, tension hooks, until the generator was snug as cargo on a ship's deck. Then he was back behind the wheel, water dripping off his beard, his breath clouding the cab. For a second, his hand hovered over the ignition. Outside, thunder cracked like a warning. His other hand touched the glove box. Inside it, tucked behind registration papers, was a faded photo of Leah, her smile still as bright, still as alive as the day he'd taken it. He stared for a moment, then said aloud, "Not this time," and turned the key. The engine roared to life. The truck peeled away from the curb and Malcolm plunged back into the storm. Meanwhile, back at Sarasota Memorial, the ICU was flickering. A pair of nurses monitored the heart machines, watching the voltage drop steadily. One patient was already unconscious, the monitors dim. A young boy barely stirred in his bed, his lungs weak. and the elderly woman murmured incoherently, her breath catching in short gasps. "Power levels at critical," the technician reported. "Regulators failing within minutes." There wasn't a plan B. Nobody had one. The only hope they'd been offered was a man with no badge, no title, and a promise most thought impossible. But Malcolm was coming. The final stretch of road before the hospital was nearly impassable, cars abandoned on sidewalks, a power pole half fallen across 2 lanes. He swerved, tires sliding, engines straining. As he made the last turn, the hospital rose ahead like a glowing ghost. Emergency lights bathed the entrance in red. He pulled to the side lot near the utility entrance, leapt from the cab, and sprinted to the back. Rain pounded his face. His hands trembled as he unlatched the cords, dragging the dolly down the ramp. A guard spotted him. "What the hell are you doing?" the man yelled, eyes wide. "Generator," Malcolm shouted back. "For the ICU." A nurse appeared seconds later, radio in hand. "He's the one," she said urgently. "Bring it in." He pushed the dolly through the corridor, soaked to the skin, boots squelching. 2 hospital engineers met him at the junction box, eyes skeptical until they saw the machine. "Fueled?" one asked. "Tested?" "Yes," Malcolm replied through clenched teeth. "Built it myself. Won't quit on you." They connected wires, ran conduit, adjusted flow levels. The old generator died just as they hit the switch, and then light. The ICU brightened in a wave of energy. Machines beeped back to life. Ventilators surged. Oxygen flowed. The little boy stirred. Deborah Warren's eyes fluttered open. Nurses exhaled. Techs shouted confirmation. "Vitals holding. All 3 patients are stable." And Malcolm? He stood in the hallway, soaked, chest heaving, staring through the glass. Somewhere deep inside, he felt it. That moment when the silence he had feared, the one that had taken Leah, had been beaten back, if only for a night. He closed his eyes and whispered her name. Not out of sadness, but peace. In the control room just off the ICU, the air had gone thick with tension. Every technician, nurse, and doctor was moving fast but quiet, like the wrong sound might snap the fragile hold they had on the lives behind the glass. The old generator's last pulse had died a full 60 seconds ago, and now everything rode on the machine Malcolm had rolled in with the kind of urgency you only see in war zones or emergency rooms on the edge of collapse. The moment the switch was thrown and his generator roared to life, there wasn't time for applause. There wasn't even time for relief. Just breath, a collective breath held, then slowly exhaled, as lights steadied and monitors blinked back into rhythm. But Malcolm didn't leave. He stood near the doorway, soaked, silent, eyes fixed on the ICU like he was trying to confirm with his own heart that the storm inside had truly passed. Water dripped from the cuffs of his sleeves, pooled around his boots, but he didn't move. The nurses didn't ask him to. They could sense it. Whatever brought him here wasn't finished yet. The doctor on call, a wiry man named Hargrove with sharp glasses and sleeves rolled high on his arms, made a final note on his clipboard and stepped into the hall. He glanced at Malcolm, hesitated, then said, "You just bought us a miracle, man." Malcolm nodded, nothing more. "You good?" Hargrove asked, not sure what else to say. Malcolm gave the faintest shrug, eyes still on the old woman in the bed. Her chest now rose and fell with regularity, the wheeze gone, color returning to her face. After a long minute he turned and walked back through the corridor, his boots leaving a trail of muddy water that no one cleaned up right away. Outside the storm still screamed, but it had changed. Less rage, more exhaustion, like even Hurricane Milton was finally tiring. The parking lot was half underwater now. The truck sat where he left it, battered and covered in palm fronds. He climbed into the cab, hands aching, chest tight. For the first time all night, he sat still. The rain hit the roof in a steady rhythm, and in that small silence something in him began to ease. Back inside, the power crew was still checking connections, but the ICU had stabilized. Nurses were now speaking in normal voices again. The boy had opened his eyes and asked for his mom. One of the aides was already calling her. Another nurse sat beside Mrs. Warren, adjusting her blankets, unaware that the man who had made her breath possible again had just walked back into the dark. On the drive back, Malcolm didn't go home. Not yet. He drove aimlessly through the soaked streets of Sarasota, past darkened homes, silent streetlights, stores with shattered windows, and signs twisted backward by the wind. He passed a police cruiser stalled in an intersection, its lights flashing uselessly against the rain. He passed a man pulling his dog through thigh-high water, both of them too tired to run. This wasn't just about one hospital. It never was. It was about a city surviving on the edge. He thought of all the people who never even got the chance to make a difference because no one had ever given them the tools or the trust. His truck groaned as it rolled back toward Bradenton. The storm's fury was finally letting go, but the damage it left behind was clear. His neighborhood was half dark, half flooded. Trash cans floated past porches. Trees were down across fences. Somewhere in the distance, a baby cried. He pulled into his driveway slowly, headlights casting long shadows across the cracked garage. He sat behind the wheel for a moment longer, then killed the engine. Inside the shop, everything was still damp from earlier. Tools had been scattered by the wind. A wrench clinked underfoot as he stepped inside. He looked around at the dim room. The place smelled of oil and storm water. He walked to the back corner and found Leah's photo again, still tucked behind a worn license plate nailed to the wall. He stared at her smile, feeling everything and nothing all at once. He thought of her that night and what she would have said if she'd seen what he did tonight. She would have told him he did the right thing, that he finally saved someone, even if it wasn't her. A crack of thunder broke outside, far off now. The storm was nearly gone. But something had shifted. Not just in the air, not just in the hospital, but in Malcolm. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a shadow in his own city. He had walked into the storm, brought back light, and left without a name. The next morning, while the town counted the fallen trees and tallied the damage, someone at the hospital began asking about the man with the generator. A nurse swore he didn't give his name. A technician said he might have been a mechanic. A doctor thought he might have been military, the way he carried himself. But no one could say for sure. No one took a photo. He was just a face in the storm, a figure in the rain. Malcolm never said a word. He returned to his shop, fixed the door, cleaned the tools, and checked the straps on his truck like nothing had happened. But he knew. He knew what 30 minutes meant. He knew what silence sounded like when machines stopped. And this time he'd beaten it. He'd given someone else the time Leah never got. The generator stayed in the truck bed for 2 more days before he finally brought it back inside. Still clean, still warm to the touch, still humming faintly, like it knew it had done something good. Like it remembered, too. It started with a headline. Just a single line in the Bradenton Herald, tucked near the bottom of the second page. Local mechanic delivers generator through storm, saves ICU during Hurricane Milton. There was no photo, just a name. Malcolm Reed. And a few lines about a man who braved gale force winds to bring power to a hospital on the edge of failure. But the story spread quickly. By that afternoon, it had made its way to Sarasota's regional news. By the next morning, it was on local radio, then the evening broadcast, then picked up by national blogs hungry for hope between stories of destruction and loss. People needed someone to believe in after the storm, and here he was. The reports were always the same. A mechanic from Bradenton, mid-40s, brought his own generator to a failing hospital when backup power gave out. Got there with only minutes to spare, then left without giving his name. No interviews, no reward. Just disappeared into the storm like a ghost with grit. At first, Malcolm didn't notice the attention. He was too busy putting his shop back together, fixing the cracked siding, hammering the dented garage door back into place, draining water out of the tool cabinets. When neighbors passed, they gave him nods that lingered a little longer than usual. A few even stopped to ask if he was the man in the story. He shrugged and said nothing, not to be rude, just because it didn't feel like something that needed explaining. He had done what needed to be done. That was enough. But then, on the third day, a black SUV rolled slowly up the gravel drive of Reed Auto Repairs. It didn't belong. Not in this part of town. The car was sleek, spotless, the kind of vehicle that didn't usually stop unless someone was lost or avoiding traffic. Malcolm watched from the doorway, rag in hand, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat on his brow from pulling an engine most of the morning. The door opened. A woman stepped out. She moved like she belonged in places with glass walls and boardrooms. Tall, poised, dressed in a sharp navy pantsuit that still managed to look composed despite the Florida heat. Her heels clicked across the cracked pavement until they reached the edge of the bay where Malcolm stood. She didn't offer a smile. She offered her hand. "Mr. Reed," she said, "my name is Angela Warren. I believe you saved my mother's life." Angela took a breath and looked around the shop, at the rusted signage, the patched roof, the uneven floor. "I know this place matters to you," she said, "and I know you didn't ask for thanks, but I don't believe in debts going unpaid." She turned slightly, motioned toward the SUV, and the rear doors opened. A man stepped out carrying a rolled-up set of architectural plans. Another followed with a tablet. Malcolm blinked, slowly realizing what was happening. Angela continued, "I run a tech firm in Tampa. We specialize in emergency systems, but what you did, without any equipment, without any support, was more than we've ever done. With 10 times the resources, you deserve more than headlines. You deserve the tools to keep doing what you do best." He didn't answer right away, just stood there, looking at the blueprints now laid out across the hood of his own truck. Designs for a new garage, solar-powered backup systems, stormproofing, a customer lobby, a full upgrade from the patched-together shop he'd worked in for over a decade. It was overwhelming in its precision, and it was real. Angela didn't pressure him. She simply said, "This isn't charity, this is respect." The renovation began quietly. Crews arrived early each morning, respectful and fast. They worked around Malcolm's hours, never interfered with his repairs. The old sign came down one Thursday, the new one going up in its place. Reed Motors. Built to last. It was clean and bold, the letters etched in steel, catching the sunlight like a badge of honor. People started showing up, not just for car work, but to see him. One man brought a flat tire just to say thank you. A woman from the neighborhood asked if he could fix her old washing machine, since you clearly fix everything. Local schools invited him to speak. He turned most of them down, but the high school across the street caught him on a good day. He gave a short talk to a class full of teenagers who'd only known his name from YouTube clips and local news. "I just did what I could," he told them. "Didn't wait for permission. Don't need to be a hero to be helpful, just need to move." Then came the ceremony. Angela returned, this time with a city council member and a reporter from Channel 4 News. They held a ribbon cutting in front of the new garage. A small crowd gathered, customers, neighbors, even a few hospital staff who'd come to thank him in person. Rachel was there with her 2 kids. Her son wore a cape someone had made out of a trash bag and duct tape. Her daughter held a cardboard sign that said, "He saved us too." Angela gave a speech. It was brief, heartfelt. In the middle of the worst storm this region has seen in years, one man decided that other people's lives were more important than his own comfort, his own safety, even his own livelihood. He reminded us that leadership doesn't always wear a title. Sometimes it wears a jumpsuit. They asked Malcolm if he wanted to say anything. For a moment he just stared at the mic. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, hands in his pockets, voice low but steady. "I didn't expect any of this," he said. "Didn't do it for all this, just knew I had the right tool and it needed to be somewhere else. That's what fixing things is, right? You take what you got and you make it work." There was a long pause. Not silence, just that kind of stillness that means everyone is actually listening. Then the applause came. Not wild, not showy, just deep, honest, and full, the kind that meant something. That night, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the lights came on at Reed Motors for the first time with new wiring and power lines that wouldn't fail in a storm, Malcolm sat on the stoop out front, watching the street. The photo of Leah still rested in his glove box, unchanged, untouched. He didn't need to take it out tonight. He could feel her in the quiet, in the steady hum of the new generator behind the wall, in the way the wind passed without fear through the trees. He hadn't gone looking for recognition. But justice, maybe. The quiet kind. The kind that comes when people finally see you as you are. Had found him anyway. And in a world where storms were always on the horizon, that was more than enough. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.